He's the lead singer of one of Britain's best-loved bands, and he's one of the very few musicians who can claim to have played at both the Olympics and the roof of Buckingham Palace. He has a book out. His autobiography is called That Close. That Close. It's out now. I have been talking to Madness frontman Suggs. Suggs, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome back. We've spoken before.
We have indeed.
Suggs is here.
Indeed.
And you've got your book, which is That Close, and you've got your show, which we've talked about, your one-man show, about your life full of music, and you're just, you're a busy guy.
Fun and frivolity. Yeah, careful what you wish for, and all that.
Why have you not written this book? How old are you now, 52?
52, yes.
Why do people write these books? You've been successful since you were about 20.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it quite late to write a book?
It is, given the, the celebrity biographies out there at the moment. Yes, for sort of 17-year-olds. Well, in fact, I was asked to do a biography about 10 years ago, and, at that point, everything was written by ghostwriters, and I met this very nice ghostwriter woman, and, I just didn't fancy it. But, in the 20 years that followed, a lot more information, piled into my, existence. And I felt on my 50th birthday, the time was right. It was a strange set of coincidences. My kids had just left home, and the majority of that period of my life was spent looking after them.
So now you're freer, basically.
To reflect on my own life, exactly.
I assume if one uses a ghostwriter, what you end up with a product that you would, that feels to you, I think, inauthentic. I don't think you would be that satisfied. Even if what was in the book was accurate, it's still not really your words, and, you're a guy that writes, you write music. I don't think you would feel that satisfied having a book ghostwritten.
That's very true, and that's exactly what the overwhelming feeling was, and they offered me quite a lot of money to do it. But I think, I don't have a great experience. I'm not sort of, I don't have libraries full of celebrity biographies. But the ones I have read, I think you can tell when they've been ghostwritten, even if they've been ghostwritten very well. And certainly I have my own voice. I
think it's harder to tell with actors sometimes. With actors,
because they're acting anyway.
Because they're acting anyway, and sometimes you don't know what their own voice is like. And I read David Jason's book recently because I interviewed him, and I enjoyed it. It's good, but I think it's legitimate. But then again, I thought I don't, because I only know him through characters. Dave, he doesn't really do interviews. Yeah, I know him as Allcry, and I know him as Del Boy, and you can't tell. But I think people know you. They know your personality, and so I think it's obvious, and that's why it's we can tell that you've written this. You know that point you made about in the intervening 10 years that you learnt a lot about your own life. What were you alluding to there? What have you learnt about yourself over the last 10 years or so?
Well, I think whether you call it wisdom or just experience, you see the repetitive cycles of life and indeed your own behaviour. The older you get, and I just think I'm in a much better position to contemplate. The question for me in the book was, how did Graham McPherson, which is what I was born as, become Suggs, which is now, a relatively famous phenomenon, certainly in the British Isles, if not much further than that. And I'm in a much better position to I think, have a sort of, overview on that, than I would have been even 10 years ago.
The simple answer, by the way, is that Suggs is the name of a jazz musician, isn't it? Because your mum was very into jazz. She had lots of encyclopedias about jazz, and did you just randomly pick the name of a jazz musician?
I did indeed, yes. I was living in Wales with my aunt for a couple of years for various reasons, and I came back to London halfway through the first term of school. So I kind of missed out on all the bonding and all that. I had a slightly Welsh accent, and things weren't going great for me.
You had a Scottish name, a slightly Welsh accent, exactly. And you were very much a Londoner.
In a London school, yes. So I had to adapt very quickly back to the quick-fire wit, if that is what one can call it, of a huge comprehensive in North London. And I just got fed up with this sort of strange Welsh, Scottish, whatever it was, and decided I'd choose my own name, and I just put a pin in an encyclopedia of jazz musicians, which had a lot of exotic names like Fingers Joe and Thelonious Monk and The Bird. And I opened my eyes to see it stuck in the middle of the letter E of the word Peter, which wasn't exactly what I was looking for. But then I read his second name, which was Suggs, and I went about not answering to anything other than Suggs, and then that's.
So you're named after the jazz musician Peter Suggs.
I am indeed.
Who I've never heard of.
No, exactly, and probably never will.
Did that, using a name? So that was at school when you started using the name Suggs. Does it? Are you ever so slightly giving yourself a character when you adopt a different name? Or does it somehow make you more confident? Does it change the way that you come across?
I think, yeah, possibly. I think Freud might have had something to say about it. Yeah, as a 13-year-old, why you want to change your name. But, yeah, I think there was some sort of protective element to it. And, Yeah, because, you know, I know that at school I was doing quite well when I arrived from my Welsh grammar school, but things went down rapidly, you know, and all the cliches of hanging around with the wrong crowd was a form of self-protection, and I'm sure the whole notion of making up my own name was something to do with that, yeah.
But despite the Scottish name of Graham Macpherson and the 3 years at your aunt's in Wales, you're very much a Londoner, and your mother, a singer, she used to take you around the clubs of Soho when she was singing there.
Yeah, from a very early age I was hanging around in some pretty exotic places, for sure.
Such as?
Well, there was a place called the Colony, which is
a famous old club.
It is famous, you're right.
Where was it?
It was in Dean Street. Dean Street was pretty much where everything happened in those days. And it was a tiny...
Still does. I still think it's the best street in Soho. I've been there this morning.
There you go. Now, my mum will not leave Dean Street. I tried to get her across Oxford Street the other day. It was like trying
Does she still go to Dean Street?
It was like trying to get her across the Limpopo River as far as she was concerned. She's never crossed Oxford Street in her life. Yeah, well, the French House is on Dean Street, which is another famous hangout for bohemians and a great pub still to this day. But yeah, the Colony was just upstairs, and it literally was a sort of tatty old room with a toilet and a piano in it. But you know, when I was a kid, people like Francis Bacon and Lucian Freud and George Melly and all these real proper old 50s bohemians were hanging around in there. And so it was a very, you know, it's a colourful place for a furtive young mind like mine.
Yeah. So your mum took you around these clubs that we mentioned, and it was obviously a very formative experience. And she was a single mum. Your dad left when you were 3, I think, didn't he? Is it only in recent times that you found out what happened to your dad?
Yes, it is, yeah. I mean, it was in the researching of, firstly, the one-man show, and then the one-man show led to the book, because I'd done a bit of research and sort of got some chronology as to what happened to me. Yeah, I thought, well, I know that he ended up in Tooting Bec Asylum because he was a heroin addict. But you know, he never figured in my life, so it wasn't like I even had a visual image of him to worry about through the majority of my life. And I didn't, you know, but then in the process of researching this book, I had conversations with my mum I hadn't had before. And I discovered, in fact, that he'd lived a lot longer than I thought. He'd got out of the asylum, he'd remarried, and lived till I was about 15, which was a shame. In some ways, I wish I had just at least met him once in my life. But the strange thing was, you know, people talk about closure, or, you know, that you get to some epiphany, or something, you know, dramatic happens to you emotionally. And that didn't really, because, as I say, it wasn't like I held out the highest hopes for someone who ended up in Tooting Bec.
How old was he when he died?
He was 41 or 2 or something like that, yeah. But he remarried, and there was a moment when I thought, oh my God, he's got his life back together. But the girl he marries is 20 years younger than me. She dies a year after they marry, and then he dies shortly after that. So it's obvious that maybe they met in some sort of drug rehabilitation situation, which they both found themselves unable to get out of. But, you know, as I say, it was just...
He didn't figure in your life. But the fact that he was absent when you were young, and you were raised by a single mum, I guess to some extent that's always going to... The absence of a father, even though you didn't know much about him, is going to shape you to some extent, I think, isn't it?
It is, yeah, it's true. And that's something that did occur to me a little bit more clearly in the writing of the book. I mean, the people I was hanging around with, you know, I'm not saying father figures, but certainly, you know, strong male characters in my life. I met a lot of very strong... I was attracted to strong figures, you know, and the band themselves were all, as individuals, very strong characters locally, you know, that I'd met before the band had started. And the band themselves became some kind of surrogate family, I'm sure. But the thing was, the majority of the band came from single parents. A lot of the kids I was going to school with came from... So it wasn't there wasn't any kind of stigma attached to it. But I'm sure, that life is more rounded if there's a male character in your life as a kid, yeah.
And the band started young, didn't it? Were you 16 when Madness started?
The first sort of forays into approximating singing, if that's what you can call it. Yeah, we're about that age, yeah. I mean, there was a gang of about 20 or 30 of us hanging around in North London, and out of that came the nucleus of the band. And people were coming and going. I mean, we were rehearsing in Michael Keeble Player's bedroom. He had a piano in his bedroom, and a blanket over the drum kit to muffle the sound, and sometimes over the drummer and all to muffle him. And then, you know, it was whoever would take it more seriously on a sort of weekly basis. The band started to become more serious.
It became more serious, and also became quite political. That it was a political band, wasn't it, Madness? That it was part of Red Wedge? Is that a fair...
Yeah. I mean, it was political with a small p. I mean, you know...
What does that mean? What's political with a small p mean?
Well, I mean, for instance, you know, the Specials would write a song like if you've got a racist friend, you've got to not speak to him anymore. We wrote a song called Embarrassment, which was about Leo sax player's sister having a baby with a black guy, and how difficult it was for his family to deal with that, and how difficult it was for her to deal with her family not dealing with it. So that's what I mean by that we weren't waving banners. We were talking about those issues, but in a slightly more abstract way.
For those that don't remember that era, so the Red Wedge movement, it was a sort of around 87, wasn't it? And I think there were those bands who were political with a bigger P, there was Madness with political with a smaller P. But I think there was an attempt, wasn't there, I think, at around the 87 election to bring people over to, I suppose, the Labour Party at the time. That it was, I think, this might be slightly overstating it, but to some degree, and certainly for some people involved with it, it was an attempt to overthrow the Thatcher government, wasn't it? It was the aim of some of the people.
Yeah, it was. I mean, there were a lot of disparate groups there doing things for different reasons. I mean, Joey Dammers was there because he was really vehemently against apartheid. And Paul Weller was, I mean, yeah, we all had slightly different agendas, but
yes.
yeah, I mean...
But some of the people in it, their ultimate agenda was to try and overthrow the Thatcher government, I think.
For me, it was to try and get kids, there was already a certain apathy towards politics, which is obviously very apparent nowadays. And we were trying to do something about that, it was just trying to get kids interested in politics, whether they were going to vote Labour or not. We were people who were going to vote Labour. Yeah, and ironically, Margaret Thatcher got voted in the day we got our first proper gig on May the 3rd in 1979 at the Hope and Anchor. So, our whole career had been her entire reign.
Do you think that movement, Red Wedge, do you think it achieved much? Do you think it did get people more engaged? Because it didn't overthrow the government in 87, I seem to recall. But did it get more people involved in politics?
Well, you do all of that, you do all of that, you do all of that, and then Neil Kinnock slips up on the beach. And, that's the end of his political career. You know what I mean? That's the way it works, isn't it, in tabloid journalism? But I don't know if, we did a lot of good things. I think, we did a lot of stuff to support the miners, and I think there was some good stuff came out of it. I think, it was sort of dismissed as a bit of a kind of, trendy kind of something or other. I don't know what it achieved. I've got no idea.
Your first appearance on Top of the Pops, what year was that?
1979.
1979, and you played...
The Prince.
Let's have a look. Let's bring this in. Let's just play. Let's have a little bit.
Why not?
Of
music,
The
hey?
Prince, yeah.
Used to be popular.
A rare thing on Five Live. Never not a treat. Here it is.
With a rock steady beat. An earthquake is erupting, but not in Orange Street. A ghost dance is preparing. You got to help us with your feet.
There's The Prince by Madness, the first song that they played on Top of the Pops in 1979. Suggs is here. His book is That Close. His autobiography. How did that go? Your first appearance on Top of the Pops, how did it go?
Pretty well, I think. Yeah. I mean, it was all a bit of a blur, obviously. I mean, we were teenagers, so I don't remember it too clearly. But it was a strange thing. We had a sort of long love-hate relationship with Top of the Pops, because I think we were banned about on six different occasions, primarily for messing about and not miming properly. There was a strange sort of... The BBC was a very serious place in those days, and... as a kid, you were supposed to either be in the Blue Peter Garden or shut up and do what you were told, and we weren't the sort of shut up and do what we were told sort of people. But, they'd ban us and then we'd come back with another hit, and I think, ultimately they realised that we were going to liven up a dull day.
Yeah.
And they kept having to have us back, but...
There was a producer who had a go at you once, wasn't there?
It was Michael Hurl. I think he might have passed away now, God rest his soul. But, he was the guy... But he was like an old school BBC, and I don't blame him for his attitude to us. We were very reverent and messing around all the time. But to us, it did seem a bit strange. On a programme that was fully mined, that you were supposed to be taking it seriously in any way. And we certainly did not. But, you don't want to end up this sort of grumpy old man sort of syndrome. But there were some great things about Top of the Pops. The fact that you did see all the bands that were in the charts and all the different kind of colourful, weird and wonderful variety of the various bands that were around at the time. There were some very happy times there.
Yeah. It was always a show that I don't think it was ever meant to be for everyone, for anyone in particular, so that if you would never see a single episode and think, right, all of the music and everything booked there, that was completely squarely aimed at me. It wasn't that wasn't that kind of show. That was its strength, I think, wasn't it?
It definitely was, and everybody watched it, 20-odd million people watched it.
And it must have had a massitive impact on sales as well.
It certainly did, exactly right, yeah, and that's why people like our publicists would pull their hair out when we were messing around. Because, yeah, I mean, that's very true.
Who was presenting it in 79?
Oh, God. I used to say it might have been Kid Jensen. I remember thinking Kid Jensen, he was sort of 40-odd back then. But anyway, he's still around, isn't he? But yeah, exactly. No, you'd be guaranteed to go up the charts if you appeared on Top of the Pops. So it was a big deal. Yeah.
But with the book is called That Close. Why is it called That Close?
Well, I thought about, I mean, as I said, it was a set of converging circumstances. It was my 50th birthday. My kids had left home. And I'd had a big party the night before my actual birthday. And I was lying in the bath the morning after, feeling slightly worse for wear. And my cat jumped on a shelf and fell off and died. And it's a strange sort of... It wasn't funny at all because I really loved that cat. But
isn't it terrible that when you tell a story like that, it sounds funny, even though the circumstances aren't funny? But it jumped on a shelf and it fell up. Did it have a heart attack?
Don't know. Whether it didn't have time to right itself from such a small fall. It was a very strange phenomena. But it just got me thinking about fate and, having seen all those faces at the party before, all those friends I'd known from school, all the different divergences of where their lives took them. And got me thinking about that, how close I had been in my life to certainly doom and disaster. And then again, to enormous fame and success, which I did achieve.
What's the closest you came to doom and disaster?
Couldn't go into it right now, but it involved a car and a tree, and it wasn't my car. But, just stupidity, that things I could have done that might have ended in rather disastrous fashion.
Did you think of yourself as lucky?
I'm very lucky indeed, enormously lucky. Yeah, I mean, but there's all sorts of mad stuff, isn't it? When you do that sort of those family tree programs, and they work out, the chances of you being on this planet, given the amount of men who were killed in the First World War, for instance. The fact that I'm here in front of you today, and given my own life, very lucky indeed.
Yeah, there's loads of ways you can look at that mathematically. I mean, most people in the world probably are probably relatively poor, aren't they? I think there's been 108 million people have ever existed. 108 billion rather, 100 billion of them are dead. There's loads of different ways you can.
No, exactly.
You can look at that.
Yeah, I'm not over dramatising it. I'm just saying, it's just one of those sort of sliding doors revelations that my life could have gone in so many different ways, and I was so fortunate in the way it did go.
And that's why it's called That's Close. The Madness split up in the mid-80s, didn't they? And then reformed somewhere in the early 90s. And then in recent years, you probably had, in some ways maybe through the closing ceremony of the Olympic Games, and the performance on the roof of Buckingham Palace, I mean, you've arguably had a bigger impact in the last couple of years than you've ever had.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I mean, certainly our career has gone longer and more successfully than it did the first time round, the first incarnation. But again, this thing of fate and quirks of fate and not knowing what's around the corner. I mean, 2 years ago, we could have been sitting on a park bench scratching our foreheads, but out of the blue, you get an invitation to play on the roof of Buckingham Palace. And in the same year, the closing ceremony of the Olympics. Followed by, of course, the closing of Television Centre. I am starting to wonder.
You played that as well, didn't you?
We are we seem to be in the market for closing things down. So the post office were on the phone recently, and Cyprus are kind of interested. We're cheap and we're available. But yeah, it's all sorts of strange things that people are talking about as being a national institution and that stuff, that I could never have imagined, of course, 30 years ago. You don't... people often ask me, when was the moment when you think, and there have been so many moments of incremental success to get to this point that, even 2 years ago, it very happily ended gracefully and we'd all gone our separate ways, and suddenly something like that comes along. And
just on the roof, by the way, of Buckingham Palace, so you went up through the servants' courses. Is that right? Is that the route you took to the roof of Buckingham Palace?
The tradesman's entrance.
Okay. Then you climb a ladder.
Indeed.
Onto the roof. Are there loads of marksmen on there?
There are, yes. There are shadowy figures in the distance. And I did light up a cigarette, which I don't adhere with smoking. It's a terrible thing. And I did suddenly feel a laser dot on my forehead. I tried to light it, actually, off the laser if I could. No, there were shadowy figures up there, for sure. And we were escorted very closely by some...
How did you find the palace staff?
Heavily armed.
Charming or humorless?
Very charming. No, I mean, we were... Yeah, there was a whole floor of people who work in Buckingham Palace, all having various parties in their rooms, which we were invited to, and they were all very nice, very, very nice indeed.
Then you met afterwards you were taken downstairs to a tent, weren't you, nearby, and you met the Queen?
I did indeed meet the Queen, yes, a very strange... It had already got so surreal at that point. Mike, our keyboard player, was having a bit of a funny turn, he said, look, this is Sir Stevie Wonder, there's Elton John, there's Paul McCartney, what are we doing here? He went, hang on, and there's the Queen coming towards us. And yeah...
You attempted a joke?
I did attempt a joke. I didn't know what else to say, but I said, are you still into football, Mum? And she said, not particularly. I said, well, can I have your cup final tickets? Which, of course, as anyone old as me will remember, was a Tommy Cooper gag that he did at a Royal Variety performance. And she said, that's Tommy Cooper, which is pretty remarkable.
Good memory.
After all that time.
Isn't it?
50 years, yes. So,
Yeah.
so I felt relatively sort of put in my place.
Still a good joke.
It's still a good joke. And what else are you going to say at the Queen? I don't know. What
You could have varied it. You could have said Wimbledon tickets. And she only goes there about once every 20 years.
Oh, does she? Yeah. Princess Anne has all them as a way, doesn't she?
Yes, yeah, I think she does. Listen, it's good to see you. And your tour, by the way, you have this one-man show which is also about your life, which is obviously includes music. You've toured it, but it's coming to the West End, I think.
That's right. Yeah, I'm very pleased. I did a big tour of the Provinces, and I might do a bit more next year. But I'm doing 4 nights at the Garrick Theatre every Sunday in December. They're to be treading the same boards as Sir Larry and Sir Johnny and all that mob. I'm very excited about that. Yeah, so basically the thing is, it gives you enough time, if you're worrying about splashing out on the book before Christmas, you can come see the one-man show, stick a toe in, see if you like any of the story, and then you can buy the book. You've still got time for Christmas.
And the book is that close, largely about how you were that close to going a different direction, and in the end have gone in, I think, the right direction. You just seem like a bloke who's happy. You've always enjoyed the band, haven't you? You still enjoy the band.
Yeah, very much indeed, and we're doing some stuff for children in need in the next couple of days, which is going to be enormously hilarious. Do watch out for that.
If you could go back and meet yourself as a teenager, would you change anything? Would you give yourself any alternate instructions? Or
No, I'd be worried. I was thinking about that the other day. In fact, I was asked this question, to be honest. And I just thought, imagine if I delayed myself in the street and I didn't get on that bus and meet Mike Barson, the keyboard player for Madness, while I was busy giving myself a bit of advice. And I'd now be like a civil servant or something. So I'd be very worried in a sort of Back to the Future way that I altered something slightly that would have changed the course. That maybe where I am now, yeah.
Suggs, always good to see you.
And
Thank
you,
you very
Richard.
much
Thank you.
indeed. That Close is out now.
Thank you.
Suggs speaking to me earlier. We're back live. The Moaning is next.